So going back to our good old from the command line, we have a new command, docker, have a guess, volume. And we can see we've got create, inspect, ls, prune, and rm. So not many commands. The first one I'm going to do is create. And here we can give it any name we want. So let's go for dome train, why not? And that's created the new volume. And that's it, it's as simple as that. If I do docker volume ls to list them, then we can see dome train is in that list. There's also a whole bunch of other ones, and we'll talk about that later. The one we've created is called a named volume, and the other ones are unnamed volumes. I'll explain later when we talk about the volume instruction in Docker files what these are. But for now, let's just focus on the dome train one. And this volume is just a directory managed by Docker. So if we do docker volume inspect dome train, then we can see some information, including where it is on the file system, on my host file system. Now, I'm on Windows, but this is a Linux path. The reason for that is Docker Desktop is using WSL2, so it is actually on Linux. I could also very easily just remove that with docker volume remove dome train. I'm not going to because we want it for the next section, but in fact, let's do it. And then I can just recreate it like we did before. And in the next section, we're going to look at how to create a container and mount to this volume. So we've created volumes, but how does that relate to containers? So if you've got the latest code, you'll see that we've got this directory called volumes. And I've created the script to demo volumes and bind mounts. In this section, we're going to look at volumes, and then the next section, we're going to look at bind mounts. So initially, ignore most of the script. I'll talk through it very shortly. But first of all, I just want you to focus on this docker run command here. Most of this you'll be familiar with. So docker run, name, environment variables, the port number, detach mode. You've seen most of this, and the image name. This bit is new. -v for volume, but it also applies to bind mounts as well. But in this case, we're using a volume. So here, I am literally just specifying a volume name. And this syntax feels very similar to the port, where for the port, to the left of the semicolon, that's how we access it outside the container. And to the right of the semicolon, that's the port number inside the container. With volume, to the left of the semicolon is the volume that's outside the container. To the right is the directory that's inside the container. So it's a very similar kind of left and right. Left is outside, right is inside. If we were talking about bind mounts, which we'll talk about in the next section, to the left would also be outside the container. That would be the local directory name that we're binding to. It's worth pointing out that there's another syntax here. We can see -- mount, and this is a bit more verbose. We specify the type, the source, which is the equivalent to here. So in the case of where the type's a volume, that's the volume name. Target, it matches this value here. There is a call out in the documentation saying they recommend using this syntax. I have never seen anyone use that syntax. It's way too verbose. -v is much clearer in my opinion. So I'm going to ignore that call out. I've just never seen anyone use it. This is way easier, and it supports the different types that you're going to use. But I thought I'd mention that syntax whilst we're here. And what this is going to do, this -v command, if the volume exists, then it's going to use that existing volume. And remember that a volume is just a directory that's managed by Docker. By default, that's just going to be on the host machine in some Docker system folder. And if you remember when we did the docker volume inspect command, in that JSON, we actually saw where that directory was. If the volume doesn't already exist, this will just create it. So let's have a look at this entire script now. And the reason I've done it as a script is because I wanted it in the zip file you can download as part of this course to save you typing it all out, because so far we've been doing a lot on the command line. So first of all, we start off by ensuring that this container doesn't exist, which is this container. Now I'm doing this so I can run the script lots of times and just proving that the volume stuff definitely is working so you can see it working. So we know we do not have that container at this point. I'm also ensuring that this volume, so the volume we're creating here, doesn't exist at this point. So you can see that it's creating a volume and it's an empty volume, so it'll be a brand new directory. Then we spin up the container in the background. Then we wait, and we're going to wait whilst I manually run. Do you remember in the database folder, this create database and seed script, which creates our database, table, and insert some test data. So we're going to manually run that. Then we're going to delete the container. So this will not delete the volume. So that's a key thing. So we're going to completely delete the container. So the container's gone. Our SQL Server instance has gone. We're going to list all the containers, including stopped containers, just to make sure that we've got no containers running, just to prove that. We're going to list all the volumes, and that's going to show that we've got this SQL DB data volume. Then we're going to run a brand new instance of SQL Server. So it's a brand new instance, not the same one as before, a new container, but using the same volume command. And remember, at this point, SQL DB data does exist. So let's give that a go. So it's the volume demo. I'm just going to run this. So very quickly, this has all this bit is making sure it doesn't already exist, which is saying it doesn't. So ignore those errors. Then it's going to create a brand new SQL Server. This is the container ID, and then it's waiting for our input. So if I go to Data Studio, so this, we saw this before, this can be any SQL client. If we run this script now, then this has successfully done this. If I just refresh here, then we can see our database. We can go to tables, go to podcasts. I can select that. And we can see we've got our data in there. Going back to our command now, if I press enter, then we've deleted our SQL Server container. So SQL Server instance is completely gone. We don't have it on the machine. And it's this name, listing out all containers. There's just nothing there. So there's no containers, including stop containers, listing out all the volumes. And we can see our volume here. It's created a brand new SQL Server instance. So it's a completely different container ID. If I go back to here and then go back to here and just refresh, then we can see I've still got podcasts here. I can go back to the table and I can still do a select. So that's showing that the lifetime of the volume is beyond the lifetime of the container. So in the past, if we've deleted that container and recreated it, this database would have completely reset. But now using volumes, we're able to persist our data beyond the lifetime of the container. In the next section, we're going to look at using bind mounts. So instead of binding to a volume that we've created, which is something managed by Docker, we're going to bind to a local folder on our computer that we manage. So it might be in your source control project, maybe configuration, maybe there's so many use cases which we'll delve into shortly. In the last section, we looked at this script, looking at volumes. So -v, the left-hand side of the colon was the volume name. In this section, we look at bind mount. So this is the other script. And in this one, we're using Nginx. So again, the same kind of syntax. I'm just making sure it's gone initially. Docker run, giving it a name, port number. We've used that before. 1234 is completely arbitrary. And a volume, except this time I'm using this syntax. So this is saying, give me the current directory. This is PowerShell. I think if using bash, it would be the same, but you're doing that. But in PowerShell, it's that. And then I'm saying a directory that doesn't exist at the moment called HTML. On the right-hand side, I'm saying the directory. We've seen this before earlier in the course. This is the directory where Nginx looks for all the HTML files. And apart from the -v, it should all look quite familiar. So if we run this now, then this is spun up Nginx. And you might have noticed that an HTML directory appeared here. It's empty because it's a brand new thing just been created. If we now go to the browser and go to that localhost 134, then we've got a forbidden, but we've got some information here and it says no such file or directory. And that's because by default, Nginx will look for an index.html. So if I do that, new file, index.html, and let's just do hello Dome Train. And then go back to the browser and refresh, then it's appeared here. So here we can really start to see another use case evolve where I've got tooling inside a container, but my code is outside a container on my computer in VS Code or whatever editor it is. So if I make some other change, and go back to the browser, remember this is Nginx running inside our container, but our code is outside our container. Then as soon as I refresh, that's updated itself. We can see in the Docker output, we can see that we are accessing our container, but it's referring to a directory in here. Now, obviously this can be in source control. If I stop this now and run it again, I'm bounding to the same directory, going back to here, I can refresh and it's still got this state. So even though we let Docker create this HTML folder, we didn't have to. That could have been a folder already existing in source control as part of our project. Then when we spin up our container, we're just binding to that directory and we're using it inside the container. So it's quite powerful and there's a lot of use cases for this. So you can see that this is quite simple to use using this -v command. In the next section, we're going to look at how we can apply that to Docker files. So now let's have a look at how to apply that to our Docker Compose file. So as you will have already noticed, the arguments in the Docker Compose file very closely represent what was in the Docker run command. So -e is environment, -p in the Docker run command is the ports. Have a guess what -v is? Yes, volumes. Now, the syntax of this is the same. If we go to the PowerShell script we looked at when we did this and copy this -v syntax, it's the same. In the Docker Compose file, one additional thing we've got to do is specify this volume name up here. Well, it's actually, there's a section called volumes, and you've got to put the volume name there. And that'll work. That'll use this as a volume name. Now, what Docker does, this will prefix this with the name of the directory that your Docker Compose file is in. So in this case, Docker course. If you don't want that behavior, then you can basically say that this volume is external. So I can say external true, and then it won't prefix this with Docker course. So if you've created this volume from the Docker CLI with the Docker volume command, then you can reuse it here. But for this case, I'm happy that it's going to prefix it and the volume is going to be for the context of this Docker file. If we wanted to use a bind mount, then instead of the volume name, we use the local directory name. Exactly the same syntax as when we did it on the command line. Okay, so let's spin this up. So if we do Docker Compose up, we can see if we scroll up to the top, then we can see, if I keep going, as well as creating the containers, it's created the volume, and you can see the volume's got this prefix, and we seeded our data. So we should be able to go to the browser, go to localhost 134, get podcasts, and see the results here. So what we're going to do now is, if we Control-C out of this, if I do Docker Compose down now, so that's going to delete the containers. If I do -v, and this applies to Docker RM, forget Docker Compose. If you're removing a container with Docker RM, if you do -v, that'll also delete the associated volumes. With Docker Compose down, it's the same. If you do -v, it's going to delete all the containers and delete the associated volumes, but we don't want that. So now I've deleted all those containers. What I'm going to do is go back to the Docker Compose file. I'm going to comment out this seed, so it's not going to seed our database now. And then I'm going to do Docker Compose up again. And note that this won't seed it now. But if I go back to here, let's click away and back again, get podcasts, we've still got our data because it's using that volume that has a longer lifetime than the containers in it. Another cool thing I wanted to show while we're here is if we go back to Docker Desktop, the GUI, then remember there's this volume section on the left. If I click on it, I can actually look into that volume and go into data, and we can see the files within inside that volume. So that's a really nice way of very quickly looking at volumes and seeing what's inside them. So by now you should have a good understanding of volumes, bind mounts, and how we can use them. The next section I want to talk about how we can use Docker to back up our volumes. Say we wanted to share one of our volumes with someone else, or we just want it backed up so we don't lose that data, then we can easily use Docker to do that as well, which we'll look at in the next section.